Atomic war, nuclear winter, a ravaged wasteland populated by psychopaths, abandoned vaults that house sadistic human experiments. It sounds like a great time, right? Today, we're going to explore the lore of the Fallout series, and I can practically hear you through the screen asking, do we really need another Fallout Iceberg? To which I would say, why not? But I'm also going to structure this a little bit differently. Instead of a generic list, I'm going to focus on a few different topics over the course of several videos covering the post-apocalyptic world that we all love. And if you clicked into this video, you're in luck, because today we're going to explore the insane vault experiments.
The man outside would probably receive a fatal dose of radiation, if received in a short time, while the man inside the shelter would be unharmed.
From funny to sad to downright diabolical. So grab a Nuka-Cola, put on some 1950s big band music, and let's get into it. Starting with a single day that the entire series revolves around, October 23rd, 2077.
The atomic age was born. There is no denying that since that moment, the shadow of the atom bomb has been across all our lives.
The fulcrum point for the entirety of the Fallout universe is October 23rd, 2077. It's the initiation point of the Great War, the event that submerged the entire world into flames, chaos, and barbarity. At 9:13 a.m., 4 initial Chinese nuclear launches are detected. DEFCON is raised to level 1, and a flurry of responses are issued, including the official US response, MX-CN91. It's also at this exact point, minutes before the first strike, that the prologue of Fallout 4 begins. Then, moments later, at 9:42 a.m., the first nuclear missile strikes Pennsylvania and New York. What follows afterwards can only be described as mutually assured destruction. Basically, the last and greatest bastion of safety we have fails, and humanity plunges into darkness as the empty threat of human extinction fails to ward off governmental squabbles over resources. To be fair, the Fallout world is one where they actually did run out of non-renewable resources, so I'm sure glad that's absolutely never going to happen on real Earth. It's also worth noting that there are a few different explanations for who dropped the first bomb, and I might get into that in a future video, but I'm not sure where we all stand in terms of how canon the Amazon Prime show is. Todd Howard says it's canon, but Tim Kaine has some ideas that contradict it, and he created the universe, so I don't know who to believe. I'll leave you to argue about that in the comments. So, back to the nukes. While it's true that there are only 4 detected originally, that's far from the extent of the damage. Some especially unlucky cities were obliterated. Salt Lake City, for example, was hit by 13 nukes over the course of 7 minutes, leaving behind only piles of rubble. Other areas, like Las Vegas, for example, managed to avoid complete destruction through a series of events which essentially are the events that create the setting for Fallout New Vegas. In the end, only the lucky few, if you can call them that, managed to make it into the quote-unquote safety of a Vault-Tec vault. It's a rough estimate, but we're talking about 112 vaults with around 1,000 people in them each, max, or less than 0.04% of the US citizens. The true creme de la creme, if you will. And that's essentially our pivot point for this entire world. Contained within the mushroom clouds of countless atomic weapons and swirling vats of forced evolutionary virus lie the mysteries of the Fallout world. A retro-futuristic cacophony of heinous human experiments, psychotic cults, great music, and potentially real magic? As you travel through the bright, cheery hills of Appalachia or the serene deserts of the Southwest, you'll find a plethora of strange encounters, cute animals, new friends, and of course, plenty of vaults.
The chance of your being hurt by an atomic bomb is slight, but since there is a chance, you must know how to protect yourself.
Like I said, I wanted to make this video a little bit different, so maybe it isn't your traditional quote-unquote iceberg video, come at me, but I don't know. This felt like a better way to categorize the entire country and the lore that spans centuries and everything from vaults to mutants to Lovecraftian horror, so instead I'm going to focus section by section on the most intriguing elements of the game, and go a little bit deeper on each. And there's really no better place to start than with the vaults. Crimes against humanity is created by Vault-Tec as an excuse to perform some of the most twisted, if you can call them experiments, I guess that's what they are, the most twisted experiments anyone could possibly come up with, or at least what Bethesda could think up, and the creators of Fallout before Bethesda. Now, the story of Vault-Tec Corporation and its rise to power is not quite as unbelievable as you might expect or hope. They were a defense contractor for the United States prior to the collapse of society, awarded enormous budgets, and the influence that came with those budgets. Vault-Tec won the bid for Project Safe House, the program by which 122 vaults would be constructed to shelter citizens from plagues, war, and last but certainly not least, nuclear fallout. With the price tag on a single vault skyrocketing to astronomical levels, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. The US, despite being a powerhouse that outlasted the collapse of the Middle East, Europe, and the United Nations, could not escape the disastrous outcome of a global nuclear conflict. So, with all that in mind, and the US empire looking a little bit like a shaky house of cards in the path of an oncoming hurricane, Vault-Tec pivoted, shifting its resources and its pocketbook towards a new goal, one funded by the Enclave, what is essentially a fascist paramilitary group made up of defense contractors and energy conglomerates that overthrew the US government in its final days. The actual purpose of the Vault experiments is somewhat controversial. What originally started as a series of random experiments that lacked much of a central purpose turned into a project that sought to send humanity into the stars. Tim Kaine, the creator of Fallout, explains some of this on his channel, but if the vaults could only hold 1,000 people max and there were 122 built, we're talking about saving 0.04% of the US population, and then releasing them back into a thermonuclear wasteland just a few years later. It doesn't really make much sense. Instead, Vault-Tec, in partnership with the Enclave, began experimenting on a plan B. That is, what should they do if returning to the surface of the Earth wasn't a viable option? With the help of the Vault Dwellers to answer important questions, they set out to understand some really challenging questions. If they were to build a spaceship that could travel to another solar system and escape a decimated Earth, it would take hundreds of years. They would need to know how to sustain life for multiple generations, how to keep the water pure, how you grow food, what manner of societal control would need to be in place, what form of government had to function, and then how do the inhabitants repopulate the area once the vaults open or the spaceship lands? These were all the questions that needed answering before humanity set its course for the stars and floated around in dead space for centuries. So, with that context, let's dive into some of the most depraved vault experiments that Vault-Tec orchestrated. Vault 8. Vault 8 is a little unique compared to most of the other vaults and the experiments within, and there's a reason we'll start here. Vault 8 is located in northern Nevada, in a region known as New California, and despite my intro, it was not actually designed to be the host of any sort of deranged experiments on its population. Instead, it was developed as a control vault, with the express purpose of understanding what and how recolonization might happen after the threat had passed. Along with 16 other control vaults, Vault 8 is allowing its inhabitants to live in semi-normal circumstances. They live underground, and they'll hopefully repopulate the surface after anywhere from 10 to 200 years. So, I guess in a way, it's still an experiment, just not the kind that tortured its inhabitants. And for all the Vault-Tec's failures, I don't think many of the vaults managed to make it all that long without some sort of unintentional malfunction that destroyed the population. This one was kind of a success. This is a rare exception for the remainder of the vaults, but I wanted to set the stage a little bit so we have something to compare it to. Vault 8 actually functioned as it was supposed to. About 100 residents stayed in the vault while they were supposed to, about 10 years' time, and then roughly 100 emerged. ready to repopulate and recolonize the surface. The Vault was given the all-clear signal from the Enclave, and the Vault dwellers were released. They were even able to establish a community known as Vault City. It was, again, largely a success. Vault City was a functioning city that was technologically advanced and was even lauded for its medical capabilities. That eventually goes downhill as a nearby nuclear reactor begins to leak contamination into their water supply, but that was long after anything Vault-Tec was involved with, so you can't really count this one against them. For the experiments and the torture, you can definitely count that against them. We'll need to move on to some of the other vaults. I promise you, things will only get worse from here. Vault 13.
Ah, you're here. Good. We've got a problem. A big one.
Before we get to the really, really bad vaults, let's check out 2 others. I'm curious, which Fallout games have you all played? I'm guessing that many of you started at Fallout 3 and never really got into Fallout 1 or 2, or even the precursor game from Interplay called Wasteland. Let me know in the comments where you started, but based on the audience for these videos and the poll that I took, I'm guessing many of you are around my age. So, Vault 13. This is actually the very first vault that players are introduced to in the Fallout series. It's where you start in Fallout 1, as you wake up to a face that pretty much falls into that uncanny valley area. I mean, say what you will about Bethesda and their facial issues, this series has not been a paragon of realism. But as you wake up, you're introduced to the vaults in a rather gentle manner. Sure, the main plot of the game is that your vault is running out of drinkable water and that you need to go fix it, but the vault itself doesn't seem like that bad of a place. Vault 13 is another control vault, and it was supposed to remain closed for 200 years, studying how a community of people would survive isolation for multiple generations, just as they would if they were shot into space. But that doesn't happen. You're forced to leave the vault to fix your water issue, and the first place you go contains the foreshadowing for the purpose behind the other vaults. The vault is a little unique in that you see it at 2 different points in the Fallout timeline, once in the first game, circa 2161, and then again in Fallout 2, in 2241, 80 years after the first game. So you get to see some of the consequences and the evolution of the vault. You also discover that the original overseer that sent you out in the first game was aware of the experiments. In the Fallout Bible, a sort of brain dump by Chris Avallone, the designer and writer of Fallout 2, he talks about what the player was intended to discover. The player was also intended to apply his science skill to the central computer in Vault 13 to obtain a history of Vault 13, the Overseer's involvement in the Vault's dwellers' expulsion, and even worse, the true purposes of the vaults. The Overseer was conscious of the true purpose of the vaults as a social experiment on a grand scale, and he drove out the Vault Dweller because he was afraid that he would ruin the experiment, or uncover it. So, in the end, it seems like there's really no normal people in the world of Fallout. It seems like you're either doomed to be a brainwashed cult member, or a cult leader, or a tortured, mutated human being left to wander the desolate wasteland. One of those. Vault 15. As you leave Vault 13 in Fallout 1, you wander your way over to Vault 15, looking for parts to fix your water purification system, only to discover the ruins of a failed society. Honestly, Vault 15 seems like it was one of the first ideas that the team came up with, if only because the experiment being run here is so dissimilar from the other vaults. It's not quite as on the nose, and it doesn't feel as though the idea came from a Mad Lib. They aren't testing what happens if all the water is replaced with Nuka-Cola, or what if the sound system only played one-hit wonders, Stacy's Mom on repeat for 200 years. No. This vault simply tested what happens when you put a bunch of people with radically different beliefs into a community with one another. That's it. Unbelievably tame compared to everything else in this video, and that's why it feels like it was one of the first ideas to me. It was developed before the studio really settled on a path and a voice for the game. Nevertheless, Vault 15 does fail, but not necessarily because a group of people with different beliefs can't coexist, but rather poor population control that led to an extremely crowded vault. With the added stressor of a crowded vault and overpopulation and a lack of resources, sure, those disparate beliefs might have caused the vault to decline, but it seems like those poor living conditions were really the spark that lit the nuclear explosion. So, okay, now we've got some of the more or less normal vaults out of the way. Let's talk about the ones that actually had you saying, that's pretty messed up. Vault 11. Miles south of Vault 8 in the Mojave Wasteland lies Vault 11. A vault with an experiment so dark, I'm really struggling to understand what kind of social experiment lesson it would have been teaching the Vault-Tec team and the Enclave. As a reminder, no one entering these vaults has any idea what they're walking into. Most believed it was a chance to escape the hellfire outside and the horrors of war. Instead, they found their own horrors inside of the vaults. So, as the doors to Vault 11 closed, inhabitants were informed of its true intentions. Each year, a single member of the community had to be sacrificed, lest the vault kill everyone else inside.
Greetings, Martyr, and welcome. If you're here now, it means you've been offered up as a sacrifice so that your vault can continue to thrive. You've led a great life. Living it has been its own reward. But it is only the beginning. Close your eyes now and imagine what joys await you in the next life. The afterlife. Can you see them? Good.
So the residents comply. They learn this information from the first overseer of the vault and make the clear decision that he must be the first sacrifice. Unbeknownst to the vault dwellers, this entire experiment was a ruse. There's no danger of the vault murdering everyone should they refuse to make an annual sacrifice, and in fact, this was the entire purpose of the vault. Should the residents refuse to make that sacrifice, the Vault-Tec computer would have actually commended the residents on choosing human life and opened the doors for them to leave. Unfortunately, the residents don't come to this conclusion until it's much, much, much too late. 16 years go by, each of which included the election of an individual as the annual overseer, a sort of sick reward for being chosen as the sacrifice on deck. Until finally, after a brutal massacre and internal power struggle, 5 remaining dwellers decide to form a death pact, vowing not to engage in any more sacrifice and to accept the fate they believe is waiting for them. Only, nothing happens. They realize it's all a scam, and they've been killing each other for absolutely nothing. Disgraced and shamed by this information, 4 of the 5 survivors end up self-sacrificing, while the 5th continues out into the wasteland, never to be heard from again. Unlike Vault 11, with the opportunity for residents to essentially free themselves from the vault at any time, our next vault is a little bit different. Vault 12. Vault 12 is a bit of a different story. Leaving Vault 11, head west through Death Valley and work your way towards what was formerly Bakersfield, California. But as you approach, you won't necessarily find a vault ripe for looting. Instead, you'll find a city of the dead, aptly named Necropolis. It is essentially the aftermath of the Vault 12 experiments. Leading into the Great War, Vault 12 was supposed to be the pinnacle of what a vault should be. They were undeniably prepared for the apocalypse, including a state-of-the-art water purification system that could deliver 15,000 gallons of pure drinking water every day, which feels like a ton of water. But it turns out I was way off. The average American uses 100 gallons of water a day. Admittedly, a huge chunk of that assumes you take a bath every day, so I feel like you'd be safe to assume that there'd be some water conservation efforts in an apocalypse, and you could probably drop that number down to maybe 15 gallons a day. That would get you to your 1,000 vault dwellers within the vault. Though, in reality, that varies considerably from vault to vault. Most vaults probably housed more like 100 to 200 people. So, as prepared as they could possibly be, Vault 12 waited for their impending doom. And on the day the bombs dropped, they fled to the shelter underneath Bakersfield and waited for the door to close. And waited, and waited, and waited. But it never did shut, leading to the discovery of the Vault's main purpose: to understand the effects of radiation on people. Now, they certainly must have been more shielded than those living above ground, otherwise the radiation would have killed them all. No, instead, those that did survive became what are known in the Fallout universe as ghouls, zombie-like beings that serve a constant reminder of the prolonged effects of radiation. Vault 19. Most vaults functioned pretty similarly. They may have had their own structure and their own experiment being run, but by and large, they were built on the same format: vault dwellers and their overseer, in executive function to run the vault, usually at the behest of Vault-Tec. Vault 19 was a little bit different. On a surface level, or should I say an underground level, there wasn't all that much amiss with the vault. It functioned like it was supposed to. It sealed off the inhabitants from Fallout, and they went about their days. The only difference being an arbitrary dividing line in the residents. Half belonged to Team Red, and half belonged to Team Blue, with minimal contact between the two groups, save a small neutral group. Vault 19 was built to test the effects of severe paranoia and in-group behavior, specifically the kind you get when you pit two groups of humans against each other like a game of adult dodgeball, only with life and death stakes. And a sulfur mine that was slowly leaking into the living quarters. And 2 overseers, one for each team. And those overseers would deliberately cause tiny annoyances, purpose-built to divide the groups and drive them both insane. But, high-pitched noises, randomly blinking lights, unusual drafts from the air vents, basically anything you can think of that would cause the other side to suspect foul play. That's what happened. So, aside from that, totally normal. Notes recovered from the terminals in the vault describe the deteriorating conditions after each overseer sent this note to their residents. Greetings, residents. We regret to inform you that there is a problem with one of the purification filters. We assure you that we are working diligently to fix this problem. However, until the filter has been fixed, please try to keep water usage limited and report directly to the clinic if you begin to feel ill in any way. What followed was the steady decline of both red and blue residents, with early notes like this from what appears to be a child in the vault. I can hear noises through the intercom sometimes. Dad says he can't hear it, but I can. It's really high pitch, and sometimes I can hear a voice, but I can't make out the words. Among other complaints, residents began to get headaches, likely a result of exposure to gaseous sulfur leaking out of the caves beneath them, but their ultimate fate is unknown. By the time the player finds Vault 19, there are no vault dwellers remaining, the vault having been taken over by a local faction. The most logical conclusion is that the dwellers staged an uprising, fueled by increasing levels of paranoia, and eventually broke through the security doors between the red and blue quarters. Maybe they lived happily ever after, but I have a feeling it looked a little bit more like a red versus blue Halo Slayer match on Blood Gulch. Vault 22. Vault 22 is an absolutely fascinating vault, if only for the fact that there was truly no nefarious purpose or intent behind it. Constructed in the Mojave Wasteland, you'll find Vault 22 in the northwest part of the region, and with it, plenty of peculiarities. For instance, the approach to the vault is riddled with plant life, not the desert you might have grown to expect in the region. You see, Vault 22's purpose was not any sort of social experiment or twisted game of survival. Instead, it was focused on agricultural goals. Scientists lived there and used the vault to develop more resistant crops, and a rather valiant goal of being able to feed a post-atomic war world. And really, they seem to have been making progress, as evidenced by plant life surrounding the entrance and filling the interior. However, like most of these vaults, there isn't really a happy ending. The vault had accepted donations prior to the bombs falling, one of which was named Bovaria Mordicana. Now, with one little hint, I think most of you will know where the story is going. Bovaria bassiana is an actual real-world fungus, and it's known specifically for infecting insects, killing them, and then taking over their bodies, like a zombie. Similar to the cordyceps from The Last of Us. Mordicana, from what I can tell, seems to come from the Latin mordiere, or mordere, I don't know, it's Latin. It means to bite. So, off the bat, if I'm one of these researchers up in Vault 22, there's no way I'm accepting a zombie-biting fungus into my enclosed facility. But they do. They believe at first that it's only possible for the fungus to infect insects, and so in that false sense of security, they continue to study it. But you know what they say about assumptions. They make a living, breathing parasite zombie creature out of you and me. From the terminals, you can find entries detailing the infection of the first patient in Vault 22, Dr. Harrison Peters, and you'll find his final moments. Case 162 update. Patient Peters Harrison T. Update. Dr. Peters is dead. His vitals flatlined 10 minutes before he entered surgery. I decided to perform an autopsy immediately and discovered his lungs were filled with some sort of fungal infection. Strangely, the fungus still shows evidence of growth despite the death of its host. I'll consult with one of the mycologists on the 5th level and see if they can identify it. With nothing to stop it, the antifungal medicine that they try has no effect. It spreads. The spores circulate through the ventilation system and infect a whole host of Vault residents, taking over their bodies and turning them into spore carriers. Eventually, all the surviving Vault dwellers are forced to exit the Vault and forge a path in the wasteland. Their story is pretty dark after that. They happen across another community and end up killing most of them and then enslaving the remaining women and children until they eventually all die from a combination of starvation, skirmishes, and the same fungal infection they carried with them. Vault 34. Compared to a fungal zombie-creating outbreak, Vault 34 is dead simple. And I mean that in every sense of the word. You see, life was actually pretty good for the residents of Vault 34. At least, it started that way. Not only did the Vault dwellers have access to amenities like a swimming pool, quite the luxury if you're living in an underground bunker, they also didn't appear to share the same overpopulation issues of other vaults. Again, at least in the start. The welcome message in the Vault lists spacious living quarters, and on top of all that, they had access to an ungodly amount of guns. Ammunition and firearms rained down on these residents like they had just called in support from Super Earth to wipe out a Terminid infestation. Wrong video, sorry. Anyways, they had a lot of guns, and apparently no lock on the Armory. You can see this in some of the terminals retelling the Vault's origin story. Much of it is unintelligible, but there is this welcome message. Welcome to Vault 34. This vault features a state-of-the-art fitness facility, including a full-sized pool, spacious something 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 living quarters, something 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 something. Space is limited. We feel we make up for it with a fully stocked armory located on the 4th floor. Please enjoy your stay at Vault 34. But pretty soon, things start to go downhill. I could literally say that exact sentence about every vault in Fallout, but Vault 34 is no exception. While it started out with plenty of room for its inhabitants, it doesn't appear this stayed the case for very long. Messages from the Overseer start to detail the issue, as well as hint at some of the backlash and, shall we say, low public approval. Something about, don't these people understand? They're running out of room. Need to limit the population. Continue to grow at this rate. System cannot support or handle this kind of growth. Can't they understand this is necessary? The residents did not take too kindly to this, and a divide quickly formed, with some residents that wanted to leave the vault, venturing out into the wasteland, and others that wanted to stay. The one thing that they both had in common, though, was a desire for guns. When the Overseer enacted different policies for the purpose of population control, he wisely foresaw some pushback, and in return installed a lock on the Armory, cutting off the people from their lifeblood, the guns that brought them a sense of security and joy. This is definitely not an allegory for the United States. Definitely not. So, there's an exodus. Part of the vault leaves and moves into a military base down the road, but the remainder is sealed inside. a choice that proved to be the final blow for an already shaky administration. With no way for the population to leave, it exploded, causing their once nascent population issue to skyrocket out of control, all but lighting the tinderbox that was Vault 34. The Dwellers staged a revolt, attacking guards, attempting to force their way into the Armory, destroying parts of the vault in the process, including the nuclear reactor powering it, all to no avail. They didn't get into the Armory. So, with no one able to fix the reactor, it slowly leaks radiation through the vault while the residents are trapped within until the door either opens on its own or someone finds their way inside. But that never happens. They're left trapped within the vault for years and years to come. In fact, they end up there until 2281, when your player character happens across the vault and opens it for the first time since the years of the Exodus. Only, when you open the doors, there are no humans left. It's just a swarm of irradiated ghouls. That, and a whole lot of leftover bullets. Vault 77, 69, and 43. We don't always have to pretend to take this game so seriously either. It is a game, and these vaults are closer to dark humor than they are horror. There's a grouping of 3 vaults that we don't really know much about aside from their experiment, and they're all mentioned in a 12-page webcomic. So it's really not even 12 pages, each page only has like 3 panels on it, so it's like 36-panel comic that tells the story of one lonesome man. The comic is called One Man and a Crate of Puppets. Within is the story of Vault 77, where a single man is sealed inside with no other humans, and after 1 year, 3 months, and 12 days of complete isolation, which is basically a Mr. Beast video, he discovers a box of puppets. Still a Mr. Beast video. He brings the puppets out with some reluctance, but within a couple months, he is in full-on role-playing mode. These puppets bringing him the only companionship he's had in almost 2 years. Things take a turn when one of the puppets, in the form of a Vault Boy, appears to murder one of the other puppets. Forced to flee to avoid any retribution from the other puppets, the man exits the vault and wanders into the wasteland with his Vault Boy puppet. Along the way, he encounters a ghoul that was apparently in a vault, which might be a reference to Vault 12, the one that was designed not to close and then everyone turned into ghouls. Anyway, eventually the man is held captive by some raiders who are eventually all murdered by the puppet. It's a short story, but it also contains 2 even shorter stories. Flip back to the first 2 panels and you'll find the description of 2 other vaults that are only mentioned in this comic. So how canon they are, I'm not too sure. First, Vault 69, comprised of 1,000 women and 1 man, which is like, I don't know, haha, funny number joke, but it's the early 2000s, I don't know. Vault 69 is also mentioned within the Fallout Bible, which is a set of writings by Chris Avalon, the head writer of Fallout 2, and he mentions also Vault 68, a vault of only 1 woman and 1,000 men, both of which seem like they would end terribly. But the webcomic also reveals 1 other vault, Vault 43. And the only information we have on Vault 43 is that it contains 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther. I don't really know what else you're supposed to make of this, so let's just move on to another vault. Vault 51. Moving on from the puppets, Vault 51 was a little different from the rest of the vaults. Located on the other side of the country, in the hills of Appalachia, the vault was outfitted with a state-of-the-art supercomputer, ZAX 1.3C, or ZAX for short. This supercomputer was provided with 1 task: to determine the yet-to-be-assigned overseer position. How it came to that decision was completely up to its own processes. Looped into the experiment was one Sergeant Robert Baker, who entered the vault a little bit earlier than the rest of the residents in order to teach Zax about leadership. This did not go according to plan. Sergeant Baker's first attempt at teaching Zax involved the suggestion of a democratic election as a way to pick the overseer, but unfortunately, everyone just voted for themselves, and Zax was then forced to conduct another experiment to determine the overseer. After several failed votes, Zax asks Sergeant Bob a question that marks the beginning of the end for Vault 51. Zax, thank you. how are you chosen as leader? According to records, you were never a voted official. Baker: well, I earned my rank from fighting in that war, but my men, well, someone had to step up. To me, a real leader is someone who steps up in a crisis and takes control of a situation, whether they were chosen or not. Zax: interesting. I do not fully understand. I must process this information. Thank you, Sergeant Bob. In the coming months and years, Zax would begin to engineer minor annoyances, like pumping in the sound of buzzing flies or rigging certain games in favor of certain vault residents, creating tension and resentment. And it also created a real crisis that, in the end, it paved the way for the chaos that ensued. Food shortages, locking residents in certain areas, and removing bed privileges further divided the people of Vault 51, ultimately providing weapons to the Vault dwellers in order to create that time of crisis that Sergeant Bob mentioned proved to be one step too far, and culminated in the outright massacre of everyone in the Vault, save one sole survivor, Reuben Gill, who was named overseer of a completely empty vault. The story continues from here. Reuben is elected as the overseer sometime around 2080, but the vault was not opened for another 20 plus years, leaving Reuben to wander the halls on his own for more than 2 decades. Despite this election and no residents to govern, he was not living up to the set of standards that Zax had for the overseer, and so the supercomputer continued to torture him, locking him in a room on his own while he devised a way to escape the clutches of the supercomputer. Vault 51 is eventually reopened in 2102, and Zax sees an opportunity to conduct a new cycle of tests to determine a new overseer. Reuben, to his credit, finally manages to escape and winds up down the road in an isolated cabin where you can still find his corpse to this day. Vault 81. Onto what might be the only positive story in this entire video. Vault 81 is a shining example of humanity compared against dozens of examples of depravity. In all honesty, the goal of Vault 81 isn't as insane as the other vaults are either. Yes, the purpose is ultimately ridiculous, but it isn't quite as pointless as stranding a man alone with a puppet for decades. But Vault 81 has one simple goal: find the cure for everything. No, really, that's the goal. Find a universal cure that will solve every conceivable illness or disease that humans could contract. No big deal, right? The only issue is, of course, the test subjects. How do you test diseases in humans and try to find cures? Well, the way that Vault-Tec came up with was to install a secret nozzle inside the rooms of the Vault residents and use it to infect everyone, but also to cure them. So, a little bit of good and a little bit of bad. And just in case they had to evacuate the vault and they couldn't find a good way to cure everyone, they couldn't in good conscience evacuate a bunch of infected people out into the world, right? So they had a backup plan. In the event of a Vault-Tec ordered evacuation, Overseer must be prepared to dispose of a residential population by incineration. Propellant nozzles are pre-installed in all residential living quarters to avoid contamination with outside population. This disposal is at the discretion of the Overseer unless specifically mandated as part of the Vault-Tec evacuation order. Boys, the plan is simple, just incinerate everyone. Luckily for everyone in the Vault, their first Overseer, one Dr. Olivet, was actually looking out for her Vault residents. You see, when the Vault experiment officially started, all the research staff was supposed to enter the Vault, unseen by the general population, and then hide in secret, sealed off from the rest of the Vault. A place where the residents wouldn't know of their presence, and more importantly, wouldn't know about their status as test subjects. Dr. Olivet, a last-minute replacement for a different Overseer named Duncan, steps in with a different agenda. I can't believe it. Vault-Tec must really be desperate for an Overseer candidate after Duncan fell ill. I'm certainly qualified for this job, but with my politics, how could they think I'm a good candidate for this kind of program? Maybe there's more to this than I'm seeing. They still haven't given me a full briefing on the work we'll be doing here, but I'm not stupid. I'm pretty sure it's going to involve human trials. I won't jump to any conclusions though. Let's see how this plays out, and if they're crossing any ethical lines with me, they'll be in a congressional hearing before they know what's hit them. The terminal entries outline her growing suspicion of the Vault and its experiments, culminating on October 23rd, 2077, the day the bombs fell. She's alerted to enter the Vault and doesn't quite follow the procedure. I made a decision. I deliberately sabotaged the phone list. Such a simple thing, but it meant that none of the science staff received notification about the drill. The residents are beginning to show up, and we'll have our hands busy admitting everyone. She manages to prevent all but 3 scientists from showing up at the Vault with the rest of the civilians, and after they arrive, they quietly are sealed into their secret vaults with the 3 none the wiser. Eventually, Dr. Olivet makes the call and seals them off for good, sabotaging the nozzles that would have delivered diseases to the residents and leaving the scientists locked up on their own in secret, though she does leave them with enough food and water to last until they die of old age, which eventually happens, but not before the 3 scientists commandeer a Mr. Handy robot to assist in their experiments, eventually programming her to continue the search for a universal cure after all 3 have died of old age. We do know that Curie, the name for the semi-sentient robot, does end up finding a universal cure as part of the main questline with Vault 81, but there's only 1 vial of it, and you pretty much need to give it to a kid to stop him from dying, so it's all a bit of a wash. But I'll leave you with 1 final terminal entry from Vault 81 from Dr. Collins. I haven't touched this terminal in years, not since I gave it to Curie as her own. Seeing her reaction to having something of her own was transformational. It just seemed wrong to violate that, and so it's truly been her eyes only ever since. This final entry is an exception, and I suppose it's being written out of habit, as a man used to a lifetime of recording his experiments. We lost Flint today, and Burrow has had to spend more time helping me around the lab than actually performing research these days. So, if only to report my findings, Curie has been a remarkable success. She transcended my expectations of robotic programming. Her personality feels as genuine as my own. Her interest in scientific research is insatiable, and seeing her struggle with concepts like mortality has been completely moving. Truly, she is my greatest work. I only hope that one day she can see more of the world. If only I could be there to witness her reaction to the blue skies and butterflies she's only heard me sing about. In the end, Vault 81 probably goes down as the most morally complex vault in the whole series. Definitely more complex than a vault full of Garys, but we're not there yet. Vault 87. Vault 87 is perhaps the most central to the lore of the Fallout universe. It's ground zero for many of the issues that radiate through the desolate wasteland in Fallout 3, many of which are the direct result of Vault-Tec and the US government. Wild experiments with forced evolutionary virus that brought about the abominations that roam the countryside, creating the hostile environment that we all love to explore. Forced evolutionary virus, or FEV, is a keystone in the Fallout universe, but it wasn't always a horrible, mutant-creating, genocide-inducing supervillain project. FEV began as the Pan-Immunity Viron Project, a bioengineered virus that was supposed to evolve the human DNA to withstand bioweapons used by foreign adversaries, and there was some initial success. The virus appeared to be improving both resistance to disease, increasing strength, and in some cases, doubling the intelligence of test subjects. Ultimately, this came at the cost of increased rage and aggression, which made it a perfect fit for a military superweapon. Vault 87 was a testing ground, bringing the experimental forced evolutionary virus over from the west coast of the US and using it on the captives within Vault 87. Unlike a failed implementation on the Mariposa military base in Central California, where the security originally protecting an unknown project eventually learned the truth and rebelled, which led to the creation of the Brotherhood of Steel, the experiments at Vault 87 were carried out with the full knowledge of everyone involved, minus, of course, the residents of the vault. It appears that roughly 100 individuals, both adults and children, were convinced or coerced into entering the vault, only to be used as test subjects. You can see this documented in some of the transcripts found on the terminals, like this diary entry from a technician, Peter Stevens, inside the vault. "I don't know what to do. My Jason, my little boy, He's gone. My wife won't talk anymore. She just sits in this godforsaken sublevel and stares out of the window at the rock wall as if it's looking across a sunlit meadow or a lazy summertime lake. Jason was my life. He was my joy, my meaning. Now all this work seems pointless. This was a mistake. Better we had all died together outside than inside this permanent tomb. I'm scared. If you're able to string together all the various terminal messages, you'll eventually come to the conclusion that Peter Stevens is just a regular technician and has no knowledge of the experiments. A note from the Overseer describes Stevens quite positively before updating it to describe his descent into madness. This gentleman continues to impress me. He was just recently promoted to Technician 3rd Class by Chief Coster for his ingenuity and ability to think quickly in emergencies. Given these talents, I think he'd make an excellent candidate for Coster's eventual successor if the need should ever arise. Update. It seems Peter has suffered some sort of nervous breakdown. He keeps claiming that his son is missing and that his wife is in deep depression, although I show no records of him ever being married or having a child. I've recommended that he be taken to the test labs for observation and sedation if need be. The final puzzle piece here is that if you circle back to the medical terminals and look at the list of deceased patients, you will find Jason Stevens listed with code UD000, unexplained death, or in other words, the result of evolutionary experimentation program, EEP. Interestingly, Peter Stevens or his wife are never listed in the medical records, meaning they must have died after the vault began to fall apart. So, anyways, despite the alignment from the researchers and the security keeping all the test subjects unaware of the vault's true purpose, they were not fully prepared for the consequences of their actions, and several of their test subjects broke loose, taking over the vault and turning it into a super mutant stronghold. With this stronghold established and plenty of FEV reserves in the capital wasteland around Washington, D.C., the super mutants in the area kidnapped every human being brave enough or dumb enough to wander into their territory. They forced the virus on them and created more super mutants for their super army. Vault 92. Vault 92 is a good example of what I mean when I say that Vault-Tec lost its way. I mean, obviously they were completely villains, but Vault 92 has little to nothing about it that would be relevant on an intergalactic space journey. So, first, its premise. Bring together the world's brightest musical minds and give them a safe home in the event of Armageddon. An admirable plan. The promise to preserve musical talent. I mean, only, of course, that wasn't the real goal. Instead, they have taken the world's brightest musical minds and subjected them to WNMSCE, or, just in case you don't know what that stands for, White Noise Mind Suggestion Combat Experimentation. Basically, they're constantly playing low-level white noise within every room of the vault with an attempt to create an army of super soldiers. Here's the Overseer Richard Rubin. Yes, named after Rick Rubin. He's discussing the experiment. As per instructions, the broadcast equipment for the white noise has been rerouted from the sound booths and tied directly into the entire Vault's loudspeaker system. I'll now be able to execute Vault-Tec Confidential Plan WNMSCE, White Noise Mind Suggestion Combat Experimentation. I have 3 of Professor Miles' team doing what I need to get done and hope to show some concrete results soon. I had the engineers make it so the white noise can be either triggered from the control center or at the local security councils. The password to these councils is UIY2249. But there is also a little bit of a twist here as well. Professor John Malleus is also in on the experiment. However, he's only aware that white noise is being played in the recording studios, a place where the musicians are going to practice and make music. Not that the white noise is being played through the speaker system across the entire vault 24/7.
So far, the experiment is going exactly as planned. We're subjecting the residents to extremely low-frequency white noise in regular intervals through the loudspeaker system. Using the soundproof recording studios and the musicians was an inspired idea. Kudos to the Vault-Tec Selection Committee on their shrewdness.
Over the course of time that you explore the vault, you observe Professor Malleus slowly becoming aware of the true nature of the vault. At first confused by musicians that seem to have gone clinically insane out of nowhere, ripping each other apart limb from limb.
Unbelievable! We've had 12 more incidents in the past month mirroring Subject V920717's actions. The shocking part is the savagery these aberrants exhibit when they murder. They rip their victims apart limb from limb and eviscerate them by hand. These used to be respected members of the musical community. How could this be happening? Where have I gone wrong?
Only to slowly learn that Overseer Rubin has in fact been implanting these suggestions all along.
I can't believe what I've discovered. Just before he died, one of the security team members told me everything. The Overseer has been implanting these murderous intentions in the entire Vault population without my knowledge, using the loudspeakers in the dorms instead of just the studios. He subjected everyone to the white noise as they slept. He then implanted combat suggestions he claims came from Vault-Tec itself. He must be completely insane. No observation, no controls. I'm going to have to confront him now and make him pay for what he's done. Half the Vault is dead. The other half, fighting for its life. Good luck to all of us. And may God have mercy on our souls.
As the Vault descends into chaos, it appears that about half of the residents maintained their sanity. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem like it was enough to escape those who hadn't. There are notes detailing the remaining sane residents exchanging weapons and written notes giving advice on how to evade their murderous cohort. Okay, pass this on after you get it. You gotta keep this crap off the inner Vault males. If you can hack the control panels, use the noise flush feature to spook the crazies. Works okay and has kept me alive these last 2 days, but they're starting to catch on. We need to organize and make an attempt for the Vault door. It's our only chance. On top of the growing instability of the Vault residents, Vault 92 was also constructed near an underground lake or spring, causing it to slowly degrade over the years. Eventually, the walls collapse on certain levels, and you'll find most of the Vault flooded. I guess you have to hand it to Vault-Tec. In the end, the experiment was a success. If only they hadn't drilled into an underground well, there might have been an army of super musicians running around the wasteland playing aggressive music while sprinting towards you and beating you to death with a violin. Vault 94. Moving to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, Vault 94 was a vault built in Appalachia meant to investigate how a pacifist society would adapt to the harsh realities of the outside world. I can only assume the grand plan here was to understand what might happen if we discovered violent aliens when we flew off to another planet. Something tells me that people that flew off in the spaceship to escape Earth wouldn't be very kind to any aliens they encountered. We don't exactly have a great track record as a species. But anyways, Vault 94 is composed of entirely individuals from peaceful, religious, pacifist groups, with the exception of one Vault dweller, Tyrone Hayes. Tyrone is the sole Vault-Tec employee in Vault 94, and while technically the Overseer, is instructed to blend in as a simple maintenance man, never revealing the true purpose of the Vault, never having any type of authority, never participating in any of their council meetings, basically being a silent observer. And there really isn't any one leader per se. There is a figurehead, Pastor Gabriela Salivar, but the community sets up a council to discuss and take votes on important matters. Here's the welcome note from Pastor Salivar. From the pastor's desk. Greetings and welcome to Vault 94. On behalf of the Vault 94 intentional community, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our home. Vault 94 is founded on the principles of faith, nonviolence, and communal life in harmony with nature. Whether you share our beliefs or choose to walk your own path, know that you are always welcome among us. Vault 94 was blessed with an abundance of resources, and we are committed to sharing them with all in need as we work together to restore the bounty of Earth. More importantly, we hope to share our values and rebuild the common belief in the essential goodness of humanity. If you are hungry, come and eat. If you are weary, come and rest. If you are here to trade, our stores are always open. Welcome to Vault 94. Welcome home. Pastor Gabriela Salivar. P.S. Please check any weapons or explosives at the reception desk as you enter. Now, things, of course, don't quite go this way. Tyrone eventually falls in love and marries one of the residents, but he maintains the shroud of secrecy up until some of the members decide to leave. That's the other thing here. This vault was instructed to stay closed for a year, unlike many others in the wasteland. Members of the Vault 94 get to go out into the irradiated landscape almost immediately, which seems a little cruel in and of itself. But once the vault doors open, members of the community begin exploring, going to local towns and explaining that their vault can supply food for outside communities. You see, not only was Vault 94 set up as a pacifist vault, it also contained a pretty comprehensive agricultural setup. The vault stored seeds of every known plant useful for either agricultural or medicinal purposes, and they were, in many ways, prepared to feed the wasteland. Unfortunately for them, the wasteland wasn't quite as ready as they were. For some context, these are the true intentions of the vault, given exclusively to Tyrone, the secret overseer. Confidential, confidential, confidential. Overseer eyes only. You have been selected as the special overseer for Vault 94. Vault 94 is designed to test the adaptability of ideological groups to changing social contexts. The selected residents are all members of an agrarian pacifist religious community and are expected to reinforce that identity during the one-year shelter period. Thereafter, they have been encouraged to open the vault to other survivors, who will likely be armed and desperate. Vault 94 has been allocated high-value resources, but no weapons or other defenses. The residents will need to modify their belief system, improvise, and adapt quickly in order to ensure their survival. In order to minimize disruptions of their social order and avoid contaminating the experiment, you will be the sole representative of Vault-Tec in this vault. You are to maintain your current assignment as a Vault-Tec maintenance engineer and minimize your interaction with the other residents. The vault will be self-governing, and you have no authority and are to avoid any role in the decision-making process. Once the initial shelter period ends, you are to encourage the residents to open the vault if they have not already done so, observing the ensuing conflict and report your findings using the secure channel provided. Predictably, events play out exactly as you'd expect. When the vault opens exactly 1 year after the Great War, October 23rd, 2077, there are already people waiting to get in. A rough bunch, as noted by Tyrone. As the doors open, the group walks right past the security check because what are a bunch of pacifists gonna do? Fight you? Of course not. And so the raiders end up in the council room as guests of Pastor Salivar. It's worth noting here that Tyrone attempted to stop this outreach program, as he mentions that while Vault-Tec suspected the residents would adapt to the harsh realities of the outside world, he knows after living with them for a year that they won't fight back. Suspecting that the community is a trap set up to lure wandering wastelanders into the vault in order to loot them, the raider group opens fire, easily killing everyone inside the vault and eventually making their way to a sealed area that contained a Garden of Eden creation kit, or GECK. I'm not going to go into the details of a GECK in this video, but if you're unaware, it's basically a device that would help to repopulate an area completely and utterly decimated by a nuclear apocalypse. So these raiders find a GECK, and because of the radiation coming off the device, make the decision to destroy it with a minigun, only to discover the nuclear nature of the device, setting off a Class 6 nuclear event and contaminating everything within 5.5 kilometers. A log of the event can be seen on a terminal nearby, beginning with its initialization in March of 2077 and culminating in catastrophic damage on November 20th, 2078. One thing that I might need somebody in the comments to explain is that, to my understanding, this wasn't a true nuclear explosion. If it was, the vault would be long gone, as anything else nearby would also be long gone, incinerated by the heat of 1,000 suns. Instead, what we find in Vault 94 is a plethora of plant life mutated and evolved to kill things around it. So it seems like, even though we hear an explosion in the recording of the GECK being destroyed, it wasn't like an atomic bomb went off. It was just a big explosion. Anyways, Vault-Tec ends up being proven wrong in what I guess is the most wholesome example of a vault. I mean, everyone ends up dying in the end, but at least they stuck to their morals up until the very end. Literally none of these have happy endings, and honestly, they just keep getting darker and darker. Just like our next vault. Vault 95. On to one of the more diabolical vaults. Once again, I'm sat here thinking, what exactly is the purpose of these experiments, and what are they teaching anyone about traveling through deep space? This vault in particular seems more cruel than instructional, but let's get into it. Vault 95 was constructed as a rehabilitation center, It brought in citizens who were addicted to all kinds of drugs and promised them a way to get clean. Unique to probably just about every other rehab program in existence, once you entered, there was no leaving because the world outside was just a nuclear wasteland, so you didn't really have an option. So the residents join Vault 95 and carry out all sorts of duties, electing an overseer yearly to run daily programs, taking part in meetings to talk about their progress and struggles, and overall just supporting each other. And honestly, surprise, surprise, it worked. When the drug addicts had no alternative options and were surrounded by a support system, most of them were able to get sober. Vault-Tec, however, had a different plan. At the 5-year mark, a sleeper agent was activated within the vault and given specific instructions on how to sabotage the rehab process and observe the results. Your orders are as follows. Ensure all residents do not stray from the Vault-Tec rehabilitation program. It is paramount that it is strictly followed for our research objectives. You will act as any other resident. Your backstory and identity should already be committed to memory and will not be recounted here. You are to work with the Overseer-elect on any compliance issues while ensuring ignorance of your special objectives. After 5 calendar years, your objective will shift. You will open the hidden storage compartment you were shown during your training. Allow the residents to discover the stash of chems within on their own. Once it has been discovered, you are to thoroughly document the response of the community. As noted by the saboteur, the program was actually working. He notes in his diary the progress the residents have made and marks the day as he is about to unleash a hidden stash of drugs onto the population. Today marks the 5th calendar year since the residents of Vault 95 and I have moved into the vault. This will be my first entry. The Vault-Tec rehabilitation program seems to have helped every subject in this vault deal with the symptoms of withdrawal and cope with a new life in the vault environment. That is not to say that withdrawal was not a challenging process for some subjects. Our hypothesis was correct. When there is simply no other alternative, an individual can recover. Today, I will sneak out when all are asleep and I will open the stash of addictive substances that has lay hidden for the last 5 years. Isolation seems to have proven helpful with addictive stimuli are absent. Now, to see what such stimuli do to the social order we have created over the previous years. You can probably all guess what happens from there. Immediately, the introduction of their vices causes the residents to frenzy, unable to hold to their sobriety that they had built for the last 5 years. The vault began to descend into chaos, but not before at least one Vault 95 resident realized the sham that had occurred and recorded their anger. They said they were helping us. The vault was supposed to be safe, a place where rehabilitation was nothing but inevitable. It may have been the end of the world for most, but for we lost souls, it was a new beginning. I was grateful for the chance to start over. We all were. We had our struggles the last 5 years, but the time we spent here turned us to family. Any one of us would have been happy to play out the rest of our lives in here, and now this. Honestly, I don't know what's worse. That or the next drug-fueled vault that's coming up after this. Vault 101. I lied, this one is not also drug-fueled, but we'll get to that one next. You might remember Vault 101. It's the start of your journey in Fallout 3, the point from which many of you entered the wasteland for the first time. In fact, as I was writing this, it looks like about 50% of you, Fallout was the first game you played, which isn't all that surprising. So anyways, apologies to all those New Vegas people that I couldn't fit into the poll, but anyway. What you might not remember is that the actual purpose of Vault 101 is pretty clear. You escaped it pretty early on, or at least after a pretty grueling tutorial that reminds me of the 100 different times I started an Oblivion playthrough.
Let me see your face. You are the one from my dreams.
You eventually make it out, and as you leave, the door seals behind you. You can, of course, revisit it later, but only as part of the main quest. Most of the time, the vault is locked. So let's talk about why that is, and in the process, we'll discover the true purpose of Vault 101. The vault was a bit of a meta experiment, one that Vault-Tec intended to use for the study of their studies. They wanted to see how the Overseer role would function and change over time. What would happen to these individuals given absolute power and control over small groups of people? So with that in mind, Vault 101 was designed to stay closed forever. sealing the residents inside indefinitely with the explicit purpose of observing the Overseer as stated by the official Fallout 3 game guide. Vault 101 was actually part of an unscrupulous social experiment. All the other vaults were intended to be opened at one point or another when the all-clear signal was sent from Vault-Tec or the appropriate regulatory agency. And this indeed did transpire, with almost universally horrific results. But Vault 101's secret plans were different. The doors were never scheduled to open. In fact, the vault was supplied with just the type of equipment it would need to keep functioning indefinitely, like spare parts for the water processor. But this was just the beginning. The true experiment was even more devious and cunning. Although Vault 101 was about testing the human condition when a vault never opened, this was only the first part of the plan. The actual experiment went far beyond that, and a select few knew the true nature. That this was the test of the role of the Overseer. While the Overseer was able to interact and even visit the outside world via radio transmissions and a secret tunnel from his secret office, the rest of the inhabitants faced a much more dismal future. As far as they knew, Vault 101 was never sent an all-clear signal, and faked radio transmissions described a nuclear-ravaged world gone mad, with absolutely no hope of existence outside of a vault. The radio transmissions actually recorded before the bombs even fell, and in many cases described a world even more horrible than the reality of the nuclear wasteland. The Vault 101 Overseer, like his counterparts in the other vaults, was actually a planted Vault-Tec operative whose job it was to control the experiment from the inside. This continued until an undisclosed Overseer eventually decided to break the mold, sending survey teams out into the capital wasteland where they discovered giant mutated ants and eventually made their way to Megatown, where they would become ambassadors to the outside world. The game picks up somewhere around this time in 2271, and there is this quest line to revisit your home, but many of the outcomes leave Vault 101 sealed again, isolated from the outside world, doomed to stagnate until another brave resident breaks free. Vault 106. This one's the actual one with the drugs, I promise. Vault 106 is like the lighthearted little brother of Vault 95. At least it doesn't quite feel as evil, even though it certainly is. 95 subjects and 12 researchers entered the vault as the bombs fell, unaware of anything special. It was just a vault meant to keep them safe while the war raged on around them. Unfortunately for them, they escaped the war on the surface only to find their own war underground. This vault had the distinct honor of purposely driving each and every occupant insane by pumping psychoactive drugs through the ventilation system a mere 10 days after the vault door closed. These people probably didn't even have time to unpack before they just started tripping hard. The Overseer was instructed with telling the residents that nothing was wrong. If they smelled anything strange or felt lightheaded, it was all normal and just a small issue with the ventilation that would quickly be fixed. This, of course, never happens, and each and every resident is driven to madness and violence. What's interesting is that when the player finds the vault, which in Fallout 3 is the year 2277, 200 years after the vault was first closed, there are still insane survivors running around. And they all seem to be wearing Vault 106 jumpsuits, which would seem to imply a few options. That either A, it's the same people, which just isn't possible, B, new people stumbled into the vault and put on those jumpsuits, also unlikely, or C, the original residents survived long enough to have children and raise them over multiple generations. Again, mostly unbelievable and absolutely sadistic if true. That would mean that there were actually multiple generations and each and every one of them lived their entire lives breathing psychoactive drugs from the moment they were born to the moment they died. Again, pretty unlikely. When the player opens the vault and begins to explore it, they also begin to explore their own mind. The drugs are still pumping and you're treated to a wild array of hallucinations and flashbacks. As a fun little side effect, during your trip through the vault, you're able to interact with computer terminals, which treat you to a conversation with yourself, where you begin to become increasingly annoyed and eventually break up with yourself. They start off normal enough though, and honestly, some of the conversations are pretty poetic to me. Your brain softworks. version me. You know you want to. Note to self: sit back and enjoy the ride. Why worry? This place seems great. It's time we kick back, relax, and forget about the desolate, hopeless, bleak, and blasted wasteland outside. Have we enjoyed a frosty Nuka-Cola yet today? Well, we ought to fix that. And so you did. Vault 108.
Gary!
This is probably the most iconic vault of the series. If you happen to stumble across Vault 108 on your own, it's one of the most bizarre experiences you'll find in the wasteland. Vault 108 actually had a few different directives, and the resulting demise that you find, a bunker filled with clones of a man named Gary that can only scream Gary at you, it was not actually the main purpose. It was more or less an accident, albeit a hilarious one. No, Vault 108 was admittedly chaotic in its planned purpose, but it wasn't really about Gary. Instead, its initial plan was to fill the vault with about 500 residents, stopping short of assigning any official roles within the vault, leaving the population to figure out all of that on their own. On top of this, their power source would break down about halfway through their 38-year stint within the vault, and the overseer chosen when the vault was sealed had cancer and was expected to die within 3 years, and they also happened to have a cloning machine that the scientists within the vault were experimenting with. Hence, Gary. Researcher note: all standard positions have been intentionally left unfilled and will be assigned by the overseer according to the Vault 108 protocols. According to the pre-assignment medical tests, Mr. Jones has a genetic disposition for a rare terminal strain of cancer, which should ideally cause him to expire within 40 months of the project's inception. These two events should combine to allow a proper catalyst that allows this project to continue as planned. So, as this chaos is proceeding according to plan, they also begin cloning a man named Gary. The only trouble is that Gary seems to be extraordinarily aggressive every time he's cloned, attacking all non-clones around him. The scientists don't seem to make much progress on improving those results, but they do leave behind a log of their experiments. It's a little degraded, but you can read the culminating results of their experiments after clone 53 and 54. Attempt 53. Gary 53 is hostile toward all non-clones, as was the case with the previous 52 attempts. We may have to commandeer a measure of disposal of the pre-existing Gary clones, as the observation rooms are getting quite full. And then directly following, you can read about their 54th attempt and their 54th failure. Attempt 54. Gary 54 exhibits no change in hostility toward non-clones. If anything, he's even more hostile. Dr. Peterson can attest to this, having been injured while... Then it cuts off. By the time you find your way to Vault 108, there are no scientists left. There is only Gary. All-encompassing, everywhere.
Gary.
Vault 111. Surprisingly, despite being the main instigator behind the main plotline in Fallout 4, there really aren't that many details about it. If you can remember, the plotline of Fallout 4 is a bit of quasi-time travel in it. It wasn't really time travel, you just wake up to search for your son, who is actually an old man by the time that you find him. I'm not really going to go into the quest line because that isn't the point of this video. We'll stick with the actual Vault experiments themselves. Though, it's worth noting that you can actually revisit Vault 111 if you want to. I had always assumed that you were locked out forever, but there's a little guard tower next to the platform that you can just press a button and go back down. The more you know. So, Vault 111. As you likely remember by now, the purpose of Vault 111 is to test the effects of cryogenic stasis. Basically, what happens when you freeze a human, how long can you freeze them for, and are they alive by the end of it? Honestly, pretty relevant if you plan to send a spacecraft into deep space for multiple generations. What's most interesting about Vault 111, though, is that there really is only supposed to stay closed for half a year, 180 days. Long enough, they thought, for the radiation to dissipate and for the Vault population to re-emerge. The Overseer and the staff within the Vault are meant to keep the subjects alive and wait for the all-clear to be given to the Vaults for them to leave. Only that all-clear signal never came. and the paranoid overseer deemed the outside world much too dangerous to leave the vault, meaning everyone frozen is inside their pods and they're staying frozen for a long time. Now, a part of the main storyline intersects here and kind of screws up the experiment, turning off all the life support of the cryopods in the process, all of them except for yours, and then you wake up some 210 years after the bombs fell in the opening scene. And surprisingly, you're actually 100% okay. Meaning for maybe the second time in this video, Vault-Tec's experiments actually ends up being a success. It's not really their fault that all the other pods had their extension cords pulled out and turned off, but if I were gonna pick any vault that was gonna experiment on me against my will, honestly, it might be this one. There were scientists within the vault monitoring everyone's health continuously, although you can see from their instructions, Vault-Tec didn't have super high hopes to begin with. Members of the research team must daily monitor the vital signs of cryogenically preserved residents. Cardiopulmonary and cognitive activity in particular must be recorded hourly. Life-saving intervention is only permitted if greater than 80% of the resident population has perished while in cryogenic suspension, and must not interrupt suspension. Independent research is encouraged and left to overseer direction. 80% mortality rate is pretty abysmal, so maybe I take it back. Put me in that puppet vault or something, but maybe not this one. Most of the staff's not really too keen on sticking it out in the vault. There's a series of messages that must have been either from a maintenance person or a scientist within the vault going stir crazy and eventually planning a way out through force. No all clear from Vault-Tec is coming. We need to leave, but we're all out of food. I almost murdered Stanley for dropping a salt cracker on the ground. A handful of us confronted the overseer about opening the vault. I never knew a man that small could shout that loud. Now he's locked himself in his office along with the rest of the science staff. We're supposed to hand over any food, weapons, and medicine we have by tonight, or there's, quote, going to be consequences. I've talked to everyone. It's time. One way or another, we're getting out of this vault. We're left with one final message from the Overseer as mutiny approaches. A faction led by the security personnel have turned on me, demanding they be allowed to leave the vault. Idiots. I will not open the door to be irradiated to death out there. I'm consolidating the remaining supplies, putting the staff on lockdown, but we're going to have to start prioritizing who deserves what little food we have left. I've been too dang generous with the rations. If people don't like it, well, there's fewer mouths to feed. Vault 112. Vault 112 is likely one of the vaults that you remember if you played Fallout 3. It was famous for the Tranquility Lane questline, wherein you enter a virtual reality simulation to find your dad in the form of a dog, and have to complete a series of tasks prescribed by a child, who happens to be Dr. Braun, the director of Vault-Tec's Societal Preservation Program, or basically the chief architect behind all the insane experiments we've been discussing in this video. When you encounter Braun within the Tranquility Lane simulation, you find him ruling over it as a little girl named Betty, and by executing on his little side missions, you learn a little bit more about the history of the Vault and its intention. In his words,
Tranquility Lane was designed to be a home away from home, a new way of sustaining life after the apocalypse. Vault 112 was the prototype. We never had time to build others. As the designer of the simulation, I was given special access.
We also discover that this is not the first world that he's created, and that he's been alive, sitting in the same Tranquility Lounger for 200 years, or roughly since the start of the Great War. And he's kept alive by the machines around him, and quite frankly, that his body would basically disintegrate if he so much as tried to stand up on his own outside of the simulation. So, those other two simulations, you might ask. They include one Toucan Lagoon, some type of nightmare paradise simulation, which he details a terminal entry. I've come to realization that the Toucan Lagoon simulation has run its course. I'm tired of the beating sun and ceaseless pounding of the lagoon's waves upon the shore. I no longer take pleasure in watching Simpson wither away from scurvy, or hearing Nussbaum's screams as he's devoured by the Mako shark. I am, quite simply, bored. It is time to reset the simulation once again. I haven't been skiing in ages. Followed by an entry about Slalom Chalet, another contender for the cheesiest horror film ever. Yesterday, Dithers slipped on the chalet's icy stairs, went airborne, and managed to impale herself on the wrought iron fence. It was spectacular, and completely and utterly random. Is there anything more sublime than that bold crimson on fresh fallen snow? It's almost enough to make me reconsider a change of scenery, but not quite. 23 years is a long enough vacation in the Swiss Alps. I long for something more domestic. This leads into the Tranquility Lane that we get to explore, but within that same terminal, you can also read about the failsafe mechanism that Dr. Braun installed into Tranquility Lane, and the so-called Chinese invasion failsafe, where you discover that initiating this program would kill everyone in the simulation, and if you die in the game, you die in real life. Now, I can't really do a German accent, so just imagine it. There are days where I consider finally pulling the plug, as it were, and putting a permanent end to both this simulation and my life. That's the reason I requested installation of General Chase's Chinese invasion program, after all. By disabling the safety protocols, I have ensured that each subject in Vault 112 will physically die if their in-simulation avatars are killed. Real-world death. End of simulation. The perfect failsafe. At least it would have been if not for my own misjudgment. I knew when the simulation first went online that the secondary safeties, those established for all Vault-Tec and military personnel, would prevent my own real-world demise in the event of a failsafe execution. In the end, I would kill all the subjects and save myself. I wouldn't want it any other way, or so I thought. It's true the failsafe would scare the living hell out of every resident in Tranquility Lane and lead to their brutal deaths, but then what about me? I have no ability to disable my own safety from within the simulation, and any other avatars I could create would be driven by the simulation's AI. Routines, not actually living, thinking human subjects. Where's the fun in tormenting a machine? And so, the release of the real-world subjects is more than they deserve, more than I could bear. They'd be dead, but I'd be left here in Tranquility Lane, alone, and tragically bored for all eternity. I can think of nothing more unacceptable. As an added bonus, electing to activate this failsafe is the only way to gain karma within the Tranquility Lane questline, putting all the residents out of their misery after 200 years of torment, and stranding Dr. Braun in his simulation, alone, forever. Vault 114. There isn't a whole lot of information you can find out about Vault 114. You can find its purpose, of course, communicated to the science staff within the Vault, but their terminals are pretty lacking in background information. The other thing we have are a couple interviews captured with prospective overseers, but first, a little background. Vault 114 was a different kind of social experiment. Rather than flood the vault with psychoactive drugs or turn the residents into mindless killing machines, Vault 114's plans were instead to let everyone inside, with no real plan. That is, the lack of plan seems to be a large component of the experiment. Place wealthy, influential people alongside commoners and see what happens. Warning, this memorandum is meant for members of the Vault 114 Science Division only, or those with appropriate security clearance levels, SL4+. All others must exit this terminal immediately and report your infraction to the Overseer or a member of Vault-Tec security. Thank you. Social Science Division. As mentioned in your briefing, Vault 114 will be hosting high-ranking members of local and state government, local luminaries, business people, and their families. Future members are aware that they will be cohabitating solely with others of Boston's upper class. However, the luxury aspect of this vault has been highly exaggerated to future residents. Multiple families, chosen randomly, will live and sleep in single-room apartments, dining and bathing will be in shared quarters, and amenities will be minimal. In addition, we are currently interviewing for the overseer position from many candidates. Our goal is to find someone with no supervisory or governmental experience, and hopefully with a strong anti-authority bias. Human Resources tells us that the interview process has vetted many viable candidates. By taking away the luxury and authority these groups saw in surface life, we hope to study their reaction in stressful situations. As such, please do not undermine the new Overseer's authority at all during the experiment, even and especially if it may cause physical discomfort, embarrassment, or harm to residents. Thank you, Vault-Tec Management. The interviews with the overseers they eventually select is equally hilarious. They talk to a couple candidates that are clearly great contenders for other Overseer positions in any other vault, but for Vault 114, they can only go with the best. Soup Can Harry. Interviewer. This is Vault-Tec interview number 87 for the position of Overseer for Vault 114. The candidate has refused to give his real name and has only provided us the name Soup Can Harry. Soup Can Harry. That's right, I ain't telling you nothing. My name is the name I call myself, not the rank and number the government brands on me. No, sir. Interviewer. Fascinating. Mr. Soup Can, would you mind telling me why you're distrustful of the government? Soup Can Harry. I've seen what they do. Come up the works with red tape and bureaucracy, take over every hard-earned cent and use it to fund their Illuminati, Freemason sex parties. I'm a free man. I should be able to live as I see fit. My taxes pay for them streets and alleys and dumpsters. I'll sleep where I want. Interviewer. Sir, according to this, you haven't paid taxes in many years. Soup Can Harry. I see the back of them Abraxo boxes. Not for consumption. Don't tell me what to do. I'll eat what I want. Interviewer. Sir, you may just be the perfect candidate. How would you like to be the new overseer for Vault 114? Soup Can Harry. I ain't wearing no gosh dang tie or pants. There aren't many other details about 114, and the fact that there aren't really any terminal entries discussing the experience within has led a lot of players to the conclusion that the vault was never actually used. And unfortunately, we don't get to see any more of Soup Can Harry or his Abraxo-eating antics. Vault 118. I'm back. This is the longest script I've ever recorded, so I had to take a break, and it's the next morning, but we're almost there. In a complete 180 from Vault 114, we have Vault 118. Rather than subject wealthy residents to the squalor of the lower class, Vault 118 was meant to uphold those classes. Poor residents, up to 300 of them, would enter the vault and travel through an area of opulence, where 10 wealthy residents would reside, above the law, with every need catered to. Vault 118 is designed to test the social interactions between the working class and ultra-wealthy when under confined conditions. Working in conjunction with staff from the Cliff's Edge Hotel, this vault shall function as a luxury hotel to attract the necessary testing subjects. Upon beginning the test, additional subjects shall be admitted from the local population into a second, much inferior wing of the vault. The plan leading into Vault 118 was actually pretty ingenious. It functioned as an ultra-high-class hotel, attracting the most influential people in the area, making it an obvious choice when met with the reality of sheltering through an atomic war. These wealthy citizens would have chosen Vault 118 in a heartbeat, and honestly, many of the normal people around the area probably would have tried to get in, expecting a lavish vacay through the end of the world. But none of that quite happens. Listen to the Overseer's complaints as the experiment's start is imminent. This is completely unheard of. One of the subjects from testing Group A is apparently a researcher for General Atomics on some sort of advanced robotics program. He and his wife have convinced the other members of Group A that, with the international situation becoming tense once again, their best chance to outlast the war is to have their brains inserted into these robots. And they're doing this voluntarily. It's absolutely insane. I've tried to convince my superiors that this will completely discount the test results, but they seem more intrigued by the idea than appalled. Following this change of course, the Overseer is still expecting to let in the locals as the part of the test Group B, but unfortunately for him, that never happens. The moment the bombs drop and the vault seals, everyone except for the Overseer and the wealthy residents that have since transferred their brains into robots are trapped outside, leaving the unnamed Overseer to live out his final days trapped as the only human being inside the vault, surrounded by rich robots. Oh god, it's been weeks now, and I realized today that I've become the test subject. Instead of testing the social interactions between the locals and this group of rich a-holes, it's just me trapped in here with them. They're gonna live forever, and I have to deal with them for the rest of my life. I can't take it. And that's probably where his story ends. By the time the player makes it to Vault 118, all that's left inside are a bunch of robots who have recruited you to solve a murder. I can only imagine how long that Overseer made it before trying to find a way out of there. Scrapped vaults. And that kind of does it for the named vaults so far in the Fallout series. There are a few honorable mentions that were scrapped at different times or were never developed as part of any of the games or extended universe, and we can talk about a couple of those briefly. Vault 120, for example, was one that seems to have almost seen the light of day. It would have been an underwater vault where the Overseer was a giant octopus, and the plotline would have loosely, emphasis on loosely, been inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There are also some vaults that don't really have any information about them, aside from one-line descriptors in the Fallout Bible created by the writer for Fallout 2. They include some pretty random ones, like a vault where no light bulb was brighter than 40 watts, or one where the residents' only entertainment was a terrible sitcom, and a vault that was deliberately overcrowded, among a few other ideas. I also left out a couple that didn't really have all that much information on them. One such vault was Vault 29, said to be filled with only rich, obnoxious teenagers. Maybe I missed a few others, but this video is pretty long, so I think, honestly, I'm just going to call it where it is, and maybe there'll be more Vault videos in the future. This is by far the longest script and video I've ever made in one go, and I really didn't even make it in one go. I had to split it into two because it was just too much. And it took a lot of time, so if you watched and enjoyed the content, leave a like and a comment, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm sure I'll be making more Fallout content in the future, so stay tuned for that. Also, let me know in the comments which vault was your favorite. I'd love to see the debate on that below and maybe chime in where I can. Lastly, if you made it this far, I've got a bunch of other content on the channel about a bunch of other series, and I'm sure you're bound to find something that you like, so check it out. With that, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.